as long as we focus or we stick to normal form game, it's kind of really difficult to say anything about information. Basically, all of them play together without knowing others' action, right? So that is another reason we really have to think about extensive form game to address some economic issues related to asymmetric information. Okay, but so that's the goal. Eventually, we have to go. But for now, let's of course, it's better to begin with the simple thing, right? So keeping your mind that eventually we are interested in informationally more interesting and complicated cases. But for now, let's begin with the simple case where all actions are revealed to everyone. Meaning that information is perfect to everyone. Everyone has perfect information about the other guys. Okay? So that means two things. At most one player moves at one time. Okay? And each player knows all previous moves when making their choices. So basically every history is, or the full history of the game is always revealed to all players. Okay? You might ask why we really need the first assumption, at most one player moves at a time. But actually that is really necessary because otherwise we don't really have full information. Why? Because, okay, so let's say there are three players, player 1 and player 2 and player 3. Then let's say player 1 and player 2 moves together simultaneously. Then in that case, when player 1 moves, player 1 does not really know what player 2 chooses because they choose simultaneously. And at the same time, similarly, when player 2 makes a decision, it is as if player 2 does not have any information about player 1's move, right? So in order to really say that the game is, there is full information, we really have to assume that in every time, at every situation, at every point of time, there is only one guy who moves. Okay? So in every time, every point of time, there is only at most one guy who moves, and each player knows, observes all players' previous moves at any point of the time. Okay? So that's what I mean. What I say when I say game is we have perfect information. Okay? Okay, so one more thing. We also assume that all players have perfect recall, meaning that all players remember everything perfectly. I mean, two things are different, right? I mean, even if actions are revealed to everyone, some players can forget what he or she have observed before, right? But we don't really, but we want to, but we like to exclude that kind of situation. So we would like to assume that all players have perfect recall, meaning that all players have perfect memory about everything. Okay? So this is kind of in the line with our assumption that, our position that we focus on, we maintain that all players are rational in this semester. Okay, so remember that we had a little discussion in the very first week why it is natural and is to me natural and seems to be the first thing we have to do to focus on rational behavior, right? So this assumption of perfect recall, that is in the same line, okay? So we would like to, all players are smart, sufficiently smart, okay? So they never forget. Okay, so extensive form game is, in many cases, basically can be described by a game tree. And in this slide, I just provide you some precisely, mathematically precise definition of game tree. Okay? But to be honest, I don't really think all these things are really relevant for you. So I just prepared this slide just in case some of you are very mathematically oriented and very mathematically, curious about what is precise definition of game tree. So just in case you can go through this slide, but otherwise, you can almost safely ignore this part of the slide. And also you can ignore this part as well, except that there are two things in red. So in this lecture, okay, so basically if you draw a game tree, then it gives you a game with some sequential moves, right? But I don't really want to talk about any kinds of arbitrary game tree. So I have to impose some restriction on the kinds of trees you can draw in this lecture. Okay? So first of all, there are a lot of notations, but essentially what I really want to say here is that if you draw a game tree, then there should be one and only one initial node. So initial node means, in our previous pictures, there were empty circles, right? So these are initial nodes. So initial node is the place where the game begins. Okay? So when you draw game tree, you have to have only one initial node. Why? Because if you have two initial nodes, for example, then it is ambiguous where the game begins. Okay? So there should be always only one initial node. So that's the first thing you have to satisfy when you set up a extensive form game by drawing a game tree. You have to have only one initial node. And the second thing is any node has a unique path to T0. Okay, so for example here, this is kind of, trivially satisfied here. Let me actually give this thing. This is the picture we are gonna see later on. So this is another possible game tree. But you can see, wherever you begin with, for example, there is a node here where player one has to choose, but there is, a unique game tree. Pass toward the initial node. Okay, so it is another requirement that your game tree has to satisfy. So essentially what it really means is that, let's say, essentially it means, actually you can see it next to the sentence in red. So that's what it really means. Okay, so what it really means is that, let's say there are two different situations that can be realized in the game, such that in terms of physical environment, two situations are exactly the same. Okay? However, so there are two situations such that physically speaking, they are exactly equivalent. But two situations have different histories. Okay? So in that case, we have to, even if two situations are physically identical, we have to distinguish two situations strategically, right? Because if there are different histories, that means players have different observations in two cases, right? So we have to distinguish two nodes separately, even if they are physically different. Physically same. Okay? So that's kind of, that's what I really want to say when I say any node has a unique path to T0. So think about, chess game. Let's say, you have, just think of any kinds of arrangement of, the things on your chessboard. Okay? So let's say there are two situations, then the arrangement of chessboard, things on the chessboard are exactly identical. But the way they reach to that same arrangement, let's say they are different. then two situations are clearly strategically different, right? Even if physically they are the same. Because, player one might think, because, history of play can reveal something of myself to other players and vice versa, right? So, that's essentially everything I really want to say in the fourth item there. Any node has to have unique path to the initial. Okay, so then the last thing I'd like to say here is a extensive form game or perfect information is called finite if the set of players is finite, and if this T capital T, that is the set of all nodes in game tree. So if the set of all nodes, if there are only finite number of nodes and finite number of players, then we say the game is finite. So this game is finite because there are only 2 players and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 nodes. So these are also nodes, right? Terminal nodes. So there are 5 nodes here and 2 players. So this is finite game. But this is not a finite game. So there are 2 players, but there are infinitely many nodes, right? So this is not finite. Okay, any questions? Okay, so essentially speaking, if you draw a game tree that satisfies 1, 2, 3, 4 here, then that defines a extensive form game. So that defines what is the rule of the game. Okay, which player moves first, which players moves later, and what is possible actions at each node, etc. So that defines the rule of the game. Okay. Okay, then the next thing we have to say is we have to talk about is strategy. Okay, so strategy can be, given that the game can be more complicated here compared to normal form game, strategies can be also complicated. Okay, so let me discuss a little bit about which kind of strategy, what is really strategy in extensive form games. Okay, so coming back to our definition of strategy informally. So informally speaking, remember that strategies means any kinds, a complete plan for which action to take. Okay? So generally speaking, strategy means a complete plan for which actions to take. Okay? So in the context of normal form game, strategy is really simple because there is only one point of time where a player has to take connection. And in terms of information, it's really also very simple because essentially there is no really information, right? So in normal form games, a strategy simply means what is probability rule I'm gonna use when I choose my action, right? So that is what we mean by strategy in normal form game. But in extensive form game, strategy can be more complicated because, by definition, you have to specify which action to take for any possible situations you can face during the play of the game. Okay? So I have some mathematical definition of strategies, but you can just skip that. Okay, so another thing. So in normal form game, we talk about both pure strategies and mixed strategies, right? Of course, we would like to talk about mixed strategies later on, but for now, for today, let's focus on pure strategy only. Okay? So players do not randomize. I'm gonna talk about mixed strategies in the next week. So for today, in a few minutes, I'm gonna talk about strategies, but for now, we are focusing on pure strategies. Okay? Okay, so pure strategy basically has to choose one action at any point of time, at any situations that a player can face during the play of the game. So here, this is entry game, and there are two players, and each player has only one point, only one node at which the player has to make a choice, right? So player 2 has to choose either O or I, and in the initial node, at the initial node, and in the other node there, player 1 has to choose either F or A. So which means that in this game, it's really simple. Player 1 has two pure strategies, F and A, and player 2 has also two pure strategies, in and out. Okay? Okay, so this game, ultimation game, bargaining game, has a little bit more bigger set of strategies. So player 1's pure strategies is basically has to specify which price to offer at the initial node. So there is actually that infinitely many pure strategies you can see, right? So any number between 0 and 1 is corresponding one possible pure strategy that player 1 can choose. Okay? So player 1 is okay, but think about what is player 2's strategy. Okay, so remember that, okay, so player 2 seemingly has very simple decision-making problem, right? It has to choose either yes or no. But if you think about what really strategy is, should be here, actually strategy is surprisingly complicated here. Because remember that strategy has to specify which action to take, all possible situations that can happen during the play of the game. And there is actually infinitely many situations. Okay? So, and where two situations are different in terms of what was the player one's goal. Okay? So player 2's strategy has to specify either O or no for all possible offers that player 1 can make. So a strategy of player 2 has to be a mapping from 0 and 1. So that is the set of offers that player 1 can make. So player 2's strategy is mapping from that set to Y and Z. Okay? Okay, here is another example. So player 1 moves first, either A and B. If player 1 chooses A, then the game ends. Otherwise, player 2 can choose then either A prime or B prime. And if player 2 chooses B prime, then player 1 chooses now A double prime or B double prime. Okay? So then player 1 has two different nodes at which player 1 has to take connection. So, and at each node, player 2 has two actions. So 2 times 2, which is 4, there are 4 possible pure strategies of player 1. So for example, here A double prime, that means strategy such that player 1 chooses A at the initial node. And if player 1 has to choose one more time, at the third node there, player 1 will choose A double prime. Okay? And there are 4 possibilities. And so player 1 has 4 pure strategies, and player 2 has only 2 pure strategies, A prime and B prime. So what is interesting here is, okay, think about, compare first two strategies of player 1, A and A double prime, and A and B double prime. If you think about what happens in each case, the outcomes is exactly the same for both cases, right? If player 1 chooses A and A double prime, then what happens? Player 1 chooses A at the initial node and the game ends. Okay? And if player 1 chooses the second strategy, A and B double prime, then the outcome will be the same. Player 1 chooses A and the game ends. Okay? However, even if two strategies, independent of player 2 strategies, even if these two strategies induce exactly the same outcome, right? And moreover, they induce the same outcome independent of player 2's choice. Player 2's decision does not really matter, right? For both strategies, outcome is always 1 and 0. But however, we have to distinguish two strategies. Okay, there are two different strategies, even if they always induce the same outcome. Because think about what a strategy means. Strategy means complete plan, right? For any contingency. And two strategies are different in terms of contingency plan, where player 1 finds himself or herself in the third row, where player 1 can choose either IA double prime and B double prime. Okay? So actually there is a better reason to explain why two strategies have to be distinguished. Okay, so even if two strategies are different, let's say for some reason, player 2, for some reason, maybe player 1 made some mistake at the initial node, or something unexpected happens, I don't know exactly reason, but for some reason, even if for some reason player 2 finds herself at the second node there. Okay? So player 2 has to choose either A prime or B prime. Okay? And her choice clearly, so we are not really talking about equilibrium yet, but eventually we are talking about what is reasonable outcome in this case, and what is reasonable outcome you can call a equilibrium. Okay? So think about this way. So if player 2 has to take an action, then player 2 really have to figure out what is player 1's action in the next node if player 2 chooses B prime. Right? So that information is really matters, right? Because and player 1's action in the last node there, lower node there, player 1's actions is different, depends on which strategy he chooses. Either the first one there or second one. Right? So first one and second one, A double prime and A B double prime, they are different in terms of how player 2 will react if for some reason player 2 has to make an action in the second row. Right? So maybe as I said, maybe player 1 make this mistake in the initial node, so unintentionally player 1 choose B, right, for that kind of situation. So two strategies will affect differently player 2's action. And that also affects player 2's decision, also affects player 1's decision at the initial. Okay? So if you think about that way, you can see even if A double prime and A B double prime, even if two strategies induce exactly the same outcome, strategically speaking, they are very different strategies. Okay? Okay, so that's the definition of strategy. I'm gonna also allow this strategy next week. Okay, so let me briefly talk about okay, yeah. So so then the next question is, let me just have 1 more minute. So then the next question is how to solve extensive game, right? What is reasonable outcome? Okay, so the one way to solve the game, which is not really good way actually, it turns out this is actually really bad idea. But let me just give you, this bad idea first, and I'm gonna talk about a better idea next week. So the first trial you can think of is, okay, so we have list of player 1's pure strategy, and we have list of player 2's pure strategy, right? So then let's say player 1 and player 2 has to choose one strategy, one pure strategy before the game begins. And we'll follow that strategy later on. Okay? And player 2 also choose a strategy, pure strategy, that before the game begins, and after the game begins, player will to follow that choice. Okay? So if you think about that way, actually you can, that is really make extensive form game as if it is normal form game. All players choose a pure strategy simultaneously, and then follow their strategies later. Okay? So it is kind of normal form game with action spaces being equal to the set of pure strategies. So that is one way to solve this game. And once you transfer extensive form game to normal form game in that way, you can find out a Nash equilibrium for that game. So that is one way, probably the first attempt, people could think of how to solve a extensive form game. Okay? Yeah, so that's pretty much everything, in the lecture slide today. So I have several more examples, but let me talk about these examples next week. And next week, I'm going to also discuss why that idea is actually a bad idea, and suggest you a better way to solve it. Okay? So next week, we don't have class, and see you in 2 weeks.
太可怕了。比较差评。
Right. No, right.
那她男朋友为什么要说谎呀？
不知道，好长，看不完了。没法看，好恐怖！我要被齁死了，这巨甜。是啊，这巨甜。
怪不得你要兑点水喝。
我没兑水，我不要了，我直接把这喝完了。
啊，
太甜了。哎呀，又自我承认了。